Hi, so today we're going to talk about digital rights and in the scope of data privacy and cybersecurity. These are very important topics today because all of us are on our phones, on our devices for a great part of the day. And what we perhaps don't realize or pay attention to as much is what are our rights, what are our responsibilities in terms of being users, being people who store data, being people who give access to our own data. So today we have Omar Taj and I, Dr. Sarah Farid, and we are going to talk about this. Our background is that we recently did a project on data protection and privacy laws for a US company, and that gave us this idea to talk about it here and bring that information in view of the general public. Because these topics seem very technical and unapproachable a lot of the times. People think of it as very complex and perhaps may not explore it as much. And it's not as commonly known as we want it to be. So I've done my Doctor of Jurisprudence from the University of Arizona. I have an LLB from the University of London, and I have a bachelor's in economics and policy from Rice University. So I've been working as a lawyer for 8 years, and throughout my career has been very international. And that's why we are focused on these issues. So my focus is gender, as well as working with young entrepreneurs in data protection, privacy, anti-money laundering, all these issues. So over to you, Umar. Could you introduce yourself before we head on over to the main content?
Right. Thank you, Sarah, for having me on this. And definitely, it's one of the most important topic at this point in time that what data does exactly entails. But before I do that, a little bit of an introduction about myself that you already know my name, and I'm a data privacy and cybersecurity professional and certified in that very area. I did my master's in international law from the Australian National University with a specialization in cyber warfare and international security and criminal law. As a data privacy professional and a legal counsel for many other firms and companies that I do consult with, one of the most important questions that entails and what it does pops up is how do you protect data? Before you even answer that question, we need to understand that what does data does in our lives? Why is it so much of an importance? Believe me when I say that it's more like something that once at point in time the currencies were backed by different minerals and different forms of another precious metals like gold and everything. This is the gold and diamond of today's era, data itself. So that sums it up, the value and the importance behind it.
Yes, absolutely. So today's training session is powered by the Sanctuary Farid and Company and the Center for Justice, Rights and Policy, as well as Numiki Sophia and Legal Binaries. Heading on over into what we are going to discuss today. Okay. So a quick run through of what we're going to talk about is data privacy and cybersecurity, why it matters, 5 fundamental building blocks to keep it very simple and specific. We're just going to talk about 5 core concepts that we will be building on later on in the series when we talk about different things. And examples from the real world, followed by what are digital rights. So data, as we talked about, is the most valuable and the most vulnerable asset in our economy today. And it's a little hard to perhaps identify the exact value because it also depends on how much capital you raise out of it in terms of companies collect this data and then they have advertisers pay for targeted marketing to specific groups. And in that, they can raise different amounts of money. So it's kind of hard at times to put a tangible value on it. But I read recently that one Facebook user's data could be quantified at $100. So again, it is that. but it is anticipated to be like a $220 billion industry in the next 2, 3 years. Umar, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, like the way you put it out there in the definition that the most one of the most valuable and vulnerable asset in our economy. At the same
Mm-hmm.
time, and perhaps it's difficult. The reason why it's difficult to even quantify data or the value behind it or the way it is backed up, but because it's priceless. It's priceless for the purposes of that in the eyes of the beholder or the people who really value it, or the
Mm-hmm.
kind of information that they're going to draw out of it. It's valuable to them, but as a person, as an individual, as a human being itself, it's one of the most inalienable right to actually own your own data. And by that, what I mean is your own information about yourself, your name, your email address, your intrinsic information about yourself, the date of birth, and everything. Even before you even dive into the value and the vulnerabilities behind this asset, we should dive into this that what's the intrinsic value or how does the ownership of data works? Because once we if I for an example, if we sign up to any sort of a social media forum and we give out our personal information, which is the basic name, email address, as our phone numbers for that matter, the
Mm-hmm.
most basic three aspect that makes us identify our uh, profile as someone that could be contacted with and communicated with, that value in itself, this data and this information is something which is an ownership of myself. It's not to be owned by someone else. It says this information is something that is owned by myself. So I have the ownership of this intrinsic or intangible asset in itself. That is the primary understanding that we don't have right now. The understanding that we have of right now about this is the in the opposite direction. That once you've given out your data, you don't own that. You don't have any
Mm-hmm.
ownership behind that. So the data subjects are the people who have this data or who does it or who are in possession of that data or who are being identified from this data. They don't own it. That's the mere understanding what commercialization, the economies and businesses around the world has given for the past 2 decades, I would say, that point.
Yeah, and we're constantly giving our data away without any sort of thought or any sort of like hesitation. I mean, whenever we use a software, application, we get these privacy notices, we get different agreements, and no one reads them. Like, I had a professor in contracts class and he was like, I don't read them and I am the one who like drafts them. So like this is my job and I don't even read one when I'm signing one and I'm giving my consent away. So it's premised on just free flowing data that we don't think about as being something personal. Like if we had our identification documents, we wouldn't just leave them out in the public, like just leave them and walk away because it can be misused in like 100 different ways. Similarly, what we're doing is the same thing in terms of that data is just digital. So it's not, doesn't feel like it's tangible or physical. And perhaps that also makes it easier to just kind of give it away and not think that anything is going to happen in the long run until it does.
Exactly. I mean, like the way you put it out there, that it's intangible by nature, that you can't touch it, you can't feel it in that
Yeah.
matter. So we don't have that kind of an association with that. Although this is something that gets us identified on so many forums. If someone needs to track down what they basically need in this digital era, and when I say that, your name and your email address is more than enough to make a profile out of you. If I do an open source intelligence, that's the first thing that we do that is being taught anywhere when you do an open source intelligence or passive scanning about someone and you need to create a profile of someone. Those two
Mm.
things are the only precursors that you require to actually create a profile, because that can tell you so much. That can tell me or any other person who does any sort of a surface level digging about any individual or an entity, just from these two things, your name and email address. That's more than enough. So imagine the value that it entails just by these two information. The rest of the information that I have, if I have your blood type, if I have your date of birth, if I have the kind of pubs that you really check into, your geolocations, your images, and other things that you leave that we do leave around, perhaps somewhat in an unreasonable manner, I would say, and not being more cautious about it. So that gives me a whole lot of things to actually create a profile about yourself, the way you behave, the way you interact with people, the way you perceive things to be, and could be used in so many ways for that purposes and for investigation. So yes, it does make me so the two terms that we have on our screen being vulnerable, valuable and vulnerable. the way they sound like, and they have the same syllables as well at the same time. But at the same time, the point being this, that the valuable, the two precursors that I just talked about, their name and email, this even in itself makes your data valuable, and at the same time, these two only things makes you vulnerable over the cyberspace. That's how this asset is one of the most valuable and vulnerable asset in our economy. To sum it up,
Yeah, that's
right?
very nicely put because there's like two sides of the same coin. Where it's valuable, it's also vulnerable. So, like, how do we go about protecting it?
Yep.
Yes. So this is a map that is showing how many internet users there are and how many people are logging on, excuse me, from around the world. So as you can see in developed countries such as the US or Europe, there is there is a higher prevalence of usage and users. And this is a map from 2013, but by 2023, it's estimated that there are 20 billion devices from that have doubled from 10 billion only 10 years ago. So usually a person has a laptop and at least a phone, or perhaps they have two phones, they may have a tablet. So counting all of those, one person could have more than one or two devices at a single time that they're operating.
Yep, that's true. I mean, like, maybe this number would go to five or something for a person like me who's into cybersecurity and data protection, because
Yeah.
like I'm and it could be just a one or two users for a normal person, or perhaps like someone who just uses it for the purposes of social media interaction and for daily use. But that this number has actually drastically improved, as you said, and it has actually gone bonkers, if I would say that's the correct word, to the way technological rapid movement have been, and the drastic change that we have seen post COVID, because of the remote work settings and hybrid settings that emerged all over the world globally. That has also surged the way people use devices, and there was a huge surge in the demand and supply of electronic communication devices all over the world during that period of time. Just like in a matter of just 2 years or 3 years, you have seen a huge surge of about almost 100% or maybe 200% in that part. Yep.
Yes, and especially with the recent COVID crisis, there
Yep.
has been people stayed indoors more and they're just used to that even more so now than going out.
Yep.
And, like they're spending more time online for sure. Okay, so moving on to our one of five definitions. The first one is personal data, and the second one is PII. So, Umar, would you like to elaborate on this?
Right. Like, so starting on with the personal data, as the name suggests itself, that it's really personal to yourself. But before even we go that, if I would say that like, it's like personal data is more like any sort of information that you have which relates to any living individual, or who can be identified by using all of that information into a personality, or a profile can be made out of it. So it could include your name, your first name, last names, your date of birth, your email addresses, if you use it occasionally or frequently over a certain point in time, and other identifiables that are more personal to yourself, maybe your social security identification numbers or passports. Any of that matter would be counted under the personal data information. And
Mm.
other than that, it's like the other aspect, which is the PII, which is the personally identifiable information. It's the same thing, but it's just more detailed analysis of a person, where you have a more personal information or more personal data, which can actually be concluded to form a complete profile about a person, and could be directly related to that person. That would make it personally identifiable.
Yeah, and it could also be like your age, your gender, the universities you attend, because all of these together make a profile to identify that person. So, like,
Exactly.
if you know where this person went to university and their gender and all this data together, you could be sure that this is the specific person whose data you have collected from
Exactly.
different sources, even.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we proceed, we have a very interesting video
Oh
that
yes.
really sums it up very well on what is PII.
I hope the viewers would like it more than us.
I'm sure they will. I just attended this learning festival over the weekend, and it said basically the lowest level of understanding is lecture based, and then all the levels are above it. So, like, video content is usually retained at 30%, and teaching others is like 90% effective in
Exactly.
terms of learning yourself and for the other person. So, this is why we're incorporating this because it makes it memorable and exciting.
Yeah, and at the same time, this is like a personal disclaimer as well that I think we should put out. This the video you're about to be about to view is not our original content. It's the content of the person who is on that specific channel, and it just we would be putting out the information when we upload this video and everything that out there. This specific video is not our original content. It's the content of the person who created that.
Yes. And it's merely for educational purposes, so we're
Yes.
not using it for any other, and under the fair use doctrine. That's
Yes,
the
and we're not using it
intention.
for any say, commercial purposes or any other purposes, just for education and awareness purposes.
Sometimes it's hard to remember the things that are PII.
Personally identifiable information.
This song should hopefully help you, so you don't have to pretend or lie.
Lying is bad.
PII could include PII could include all names and aliases, first and last and middle ones too, your date of birth and home address, your email from 92, all numbers and accounts, your driver's license, tax ID, your passport, your credit card, your telephone and social security. PII could include PII could include your fingerprints and handwriting, images of your face, and according to the European Court of Justice, an IP you can trace. And finally, we can't forget those indirect identifiers, information that when combined with other information exposes the suppliers. So if you're gonna collect it, there is really no excuse. You gotta balance privacy, security, accountability, and transparency with effective data use. Effective data use. Use it effectively. PII could include PII could include PII could include PII could include.
So the next discussion topics are data privacy and data protection. And data privacy is who has access to data, and data protection or is the tools and all the policies to restrict access to data. Yes, Umar, would you like to elaborate on this further?
Sure. One of the most difficult distinction that I've encountered among individuals and people who practice data laws is about data privacy and how do you distinguish what comes under data protection, what comes under data privacy. So to give you a better understanding and to actually make our viewer understand it in the most simplest form, data privacy entails anything which provides any sort of set of policies or rules for the way a data has to be processed and the way it is being used by someone and the way it will be accessed to by different individuals who has authorized access to that, who did do they consent the use of data to. So at every time, like whenever you have when you go to a website or you provide any sort of sensitive information to any of your social media platforms, and what is being done with that information, how is it being collected, what what part of that information is being used for whatever purposes, that is what comes under data privacy. And the way it is, and if even for that matter, if I go into a little more detail about that very specific area, so there are many places where data that is being collected from different end users or customers that is being used for improving the business processes and different other individuals, and the way to make have a very good experience or to improve the customer experience from that end for that purposes. So in that very area, we use a term, or there is a specific process that is used under the data privacy methodologies and process procedures, which is called anonymizing a data, or to mask that data to into a form or into a raw form, which cannot be correlated or identify, which does not, which makes it almost unascertainable or unidentifiable to a specific individual or into a specific group for that matter. That is done for the very reason that when data is passed through different individuals within the organization or outside to different vendors who are processing that data for customer improving customer experiences, they don't get to identify or use that data in any other abusive manner or in any other
Mhm.
form which can be identified to a particular individual or an organization for that matter. So that is a protective mechanism that is there to protect the privacy of an individual of that who is the beholder of that data. As far as the data protection is concerned, data protection is a mechanism or the set of tools or measures that are deployed by any sort of an organization to protect that asset or data over a data center where it has been collected or stored. It could be on a server, it could be on cloud-based platforms, wherever it is done. So using different sort of secure mechanisms, like a prime example of that would be just having an antivirus installed on your laptop. That is one of the most one of a data protection mechanism, or what you could say a data protection tool or a measure that you deploy that can protect you from any sort of breaches or infiltration from different unwanted individuals or people from happening, or different malwares or viruses that attack your system, and your system goes on a defense mode to protect your data or whatever information or content is available on that to be safeguarded against those threats. That's the prime information in the most easiest form, if I would say.
Mhm. Yes. So, for example, there has been a change in terms of people wanting to be more secure online, because a lot of people used WhatsApp because it was encrypted end to end.
Yes, yes.
And then a lot of people have moved to Telegram, and they are moving across the world in developed and developing countries because of the greater security features it offers. Although perhaps people are not too sure about how it does that. They just generally know. But it is something that people are talking about in terms of spreading that word of mouth that you should go on here because your data will be more secure. And in case there is a breach or loss, you will be protected.
So yeah, I'll just add up to that very specific area. So what people are actually looking for is that no one reads their data when it's being
Hmm.
transmitted from one end to the other. So
Yeah.
in other words, what does that basically entails is what the other privacy platforms, as you talked about, being Telegram or Signal for that matter.
Hmm.
These platforms basically use a specific mechanism to ensure that privacy is through an encryption, which is an end-to-end encryption. What does that
Hmm.
entail is that from one device where it is the data is being sent to the other one and the one who receives it, both the ends are end-to-end encrypted, so the message cannot be intercepted or read in between through any sort of infiltration or any other sort of cyber attack. Or the
Yeah.
organization that are handling that data, they don't even know kind of communication is happening. So what the whole idea behind that is that I am more focused on that whatever private conversation I'm having with my significant other, for that matter,
Hmm.
or for any other individual for that matter, that would have different kind of private or confidential information that I would like to keep private, rather than it being read from different spectrums of organizations, and they're harnessing those data for their own use, for commercializing it, from making or profiteering from that. So these technologies and these platforms basically are giving that security and trust, and embedding that within the users, that your data is end-to-end encrypted. It cannot be read from one platform to the other while it is being transmitted. Neither it can be read at the other area or the other organization who are transmitting or using that or providing you that services. So one of the creator of WhatsApp actually created Signal, and this the encryption method is also known as pretty good privacy (PGP). it's one of the most encryption methods they use.
That's very interesting that they named it like that.
Yes.
Okay, so moving on to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a rising area of concern because there are a lot of attacks that can happen, from terrorist attacks to just hacking, and a lot of data mining that has occurred recently. With even so, in the US, there are three credit bureaus that handle all your information for all your for your credit score, for all the debts you have, and when you've paid off things, which is so they had a huge breach of security in terms of they have all that information of social security and financial history of people, and their mechanisms. There was a breach, and over 50% of the U.S. Population's data was compromised. And it just makes you think, what sort of effective mechanisms do they have? I don't know if they were very effective in doing that, and what is the end result at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, in terms of the first thing, while I was doing my master's in international law in cyber warfare, one of the most cornerstones of that I remember that my lecturer at that point in time told me was that the next war that you're going to encounter would be the war of information, and would be on a cyberspace. So, and we could see it right now that what it meant. That was back in 2018 and 16, almost
Yeah.
5 to 7 years earlier, if you're talking about that, nearly approximately a decade ago. But
Mhm.
it turned out to be true as much as it is advancing right now. And to add on to that, like cybersecurity in itself, the way it has been, the word, uh, it's two different words that have been like amalgamated together, and they create this sense of trust that you become secure by applying cybersecurity in itself. But to be on a more, what you could say, transparent manner, to come on that point, what the more learning that I've had over the years of time from cybersecurity is that over this any cybersecurity space, or in any form of cyberspace that you are in, it's impossible that it's unhackable. So
Mm.
if I put it again, it's impossible that it's unhackable.
Yeah.
It's not possible. So in other words, this as a practice, cybersecurity is, of course, that it deploys different measures and try to mitigate risk of different threats that could be any sort of an infrastructure system or an information system could be susceptible to, or to any sort of data loss prevention mechanism that they deploy. That's in itself, that's pretty much what it is for a layman to understand, that what the cybersecurity entails, that you deploy certain mechanisms within a network, or over different forms of networks or different types of networks, and that are there to mitigate the risk of any sort of infiltration or any sort of attacks from happening, but they
Mhm.
cannot eliminate the complete type, because there is a term in cybersecurity that we use, that it's called a 0-day attack. And what does that exactly means is that attack that you don't know or have any information about. That's a
Mhm.
0-day attack. So that's there within cybersecurity. We use it because everyone fears that in cybersecurity industry, because you can't do anything about an attack that you don't have any known parameters or rules or infiltration mechanisms or defense for that very purposes. For that.
Yes, and definitely cyber warfare is on the rise, with uh, everyone from basically everyone trying to do that, and there's increased surveillance from state governments to prevent that, and also to understand that what threat could possibly be coming forward. So to know where they're exposed and how to limit those vulnerabilities is definitely part of what they look for in information security systems.
Exactly. Yeah, and there have been like since I would say the first international law perhaps that came out in about cybersecurity or cyber warfare for that matter was back in 2009, which was the first one of the most first attacks on cybersecurity of Estonia, Tallinn to be exactly, which gave rise to the Tallinn Manual, which is about cyber warfare law and one of the most international legal instruments, if we can talk about that. And since then we have been advancing
Mm.
into that. It's an emerging field where we have had like different standards of cybersecurity and data protection that has come about in that matter,
Mhm.
and it's an emerging field. where we
Mhm.
can go on and on about it, and it's perhaps going to take time before it matures itself into a robust industry, into a more robust legal framework, if we could say. So let's just keep it for next session that we're going to do and discuss that in details for that matter. What do you?
Sure. And wrapping up, we move to the last concepts that we talk about that brings the whole legal and social perspective infrastructure together related to technology is what are digital rights and what sort of digital rights are we talking about when we go online as a user, as a consumer of those apps and anything that we do online. So in this digital age, digital rights are human rights, and the five that we talk about are there's consent, privacy, freedom of expression, and just digital rights in totality mean all of the above, and then some. And then lastly, we talk about responsibilities because, of course, where there are rights, there are responsibilities, as there should be, which means that I have to make sure that the other person is also safe and comfortable in terms of not cyberbullying them on social media and those aspects of that. So when we talk about consent, there are certain agreements that we sign when we license or when we use a product or service. These are the terms of service, the end user license agreement and the service level agreement. These are the most common types of agreements we are all signing online all the time. And they're pretty lengthy and pretty comprehensive, but we're not reading them. And then there's privacy to give an overview that that is protected by UDHR. Article 12 can be seen to apply to it because anything we do in our homes that are private are should not be publicly disseminated information. And then there is freedom of expression, which is the ability to express our opinion freely from government or other intervention. So would you like to add something, Umar?
Pretty much, as you summed it up, that in terms of consent, there is always
Mm,
when you talk about it in the human rights matter, we have a consent that the other person agree to a certain area or to do commit an act or do something or perform an action. Similarly, in the cyberspace, we have this consent where that has to be taken from the other person, or they should have an informed consent or agree to do something like that. And the same way, when it comes to privacy, it's the same privacy right that you enjoy in your physical space is the same privacy that you enjoy in your private space in the cyberspace. That you have a right to remain private, you have a right to be to right to anonymity, to remain anonymous and be able to use the internet for that matter. The Internet Society Organization works for that very specific area of right to a safe and healthy internet access to the world around that, which is a US-based organization. When it comes to freedom of expression, of course, this is a qualified right. Most of places, obviously, it's a fundamental, but it's a qualified right. You can have like freedom of expression to express your opinion freely. At the same time, that should not be hate speech or
mm,
uh, doesn't go under the realms of any other violence or subject to or subject someone else to self censorship as well at the same
mm.
time. In other words, digital rights encompass almost all three of them together and many other rights that you have. And with that also comes the responsibility, as you said, that to be safe, to be ethical, to actually progress within the cyber realms, within the defined realms that they are there, and to follow the guidelines of the way to act in a safe manner for others and for yourself, and to actually look after the well-being of the other person and yourself within that cyberspace as well. So I would like to conclude over this area.
Okay, great. That's all. And in later topics, we'll be talking about gender and data. We'll also be discussing data protection laws around the world and a toolkit on how to protect yourself online and the things you should be looking out for. So if you have any questions, you can definitely shoot us an email. We are available at the following email addresses. And do comment, share, and like this video, subscribe to our channel, and just share it so more people are aware of what their rights are. And this information is floated freely. So thank you for listening and have a great day or night wherever you may be. Thank you.
Bye.